We can spend hours debating which software to use. We obsess over the perfect Miro board layout and tweak our journey maps into infinity. But we rarely stop to maintain the most critical tool in our entire toolkit: ourselves. Let's face it, service design is emotional labor. We are often the ones absorbing the friction, the frustration, and the complexity of an organization. If we do not build a protective layer around ourselves, we run the risk of burning out. It's that simple. Welcome back to our special Inside Service Design series. In this series, we stop pretending that our work is just about sticky notes and workshops, and we talk about the real human cost of driving positive change from the inside. I'm Mark Fontijn, and today I am joined by two inspiring professionals who are tackling this head-on: Kara Snyder and Siddhartha Saxena. Their backgrounds might surprise you. Kara spent years in the high-stress world of accounting and startups before finding her way into service design, and Sid started as an architect before moving into healthcare in India. In this episode, we go deep into the inner game of the profession. You'll hear Sid describe what he calls the liminal space. It's the vital gap you need to create between who you are and what you make, so that a critique of your work doesn't feel like a critique of your soul. Then Kara flips the script on resilience. She argues that resilience is not about how much output you can produce while exhausted, but rather what is your capacity to sustain the work. We also touch on the invisible work, what Kara calls lubricating the situation, and why being the person who prevents the gears from grinding is valuable, even if it is hard to measure. As always, these conversations are inspired by the interactions we had recently in The Circle. The Circle is our community for in-house service design professionals. If you are tired of carrying the emotional weight of change all alone, we'd love to have you to join us. To learn more about the community, head over to servicedesignshow.com/circle. But for now, take a deep breath, slow down, and get ready for a masterclass in resilience. Here are Kara and Sid, and this is the Service Design Show. Welcome to the show, Kara and Siddhartha.
Hey,
Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Hi, Mark.
good to have you on. I'm really excited to talk to in-house service design professionals, the people who are rolling up the sleeves and doing the actual hard work of service design within organizations. You both have really interesting backgrounds and contexts. You also did really interesting community sessions. We'll dive into all of that in the coming 50-ish minutes. But as it has become a tradition, we like to start with sort of a trip down memory lane to understand a little bit more about your context. So I would like to start with you, Kara, today. Could you take us back and share the highlights of your journey into service design? Because if I'm not mistaken, you have quite an interesting story to share there.
Yeah, I came from anything but a traditional service design background, like via the academic route or the agency route. So if we hop in our Wayback Machine, I came out of college as an accounting and sociology. Well, accounting major, sociology minor. So already you could see I liked analysis, but I also liked people. And I found my way to, I guess it was Price Waterhouse at the time, but now Price Waterhouse Coopers or PwC. And through shifts in market and hiring at the time, I ended up finding myself in business recovery services, which was a group that wasn't really taking like junior folks at the time. But when there's a lot of bankruptcy and troubled debt, like firms make different decisions. So that was really my entry into the business world, working mostly for debtor companies. So coming in, sometimes if you were lucky, weeks, maybe a month or so before a company had to file bankruptcy, So it was fast moving. It was, if you had a pulse and you were still awake at 2 a.m, like you were going to do that or that or that. So it was a really great boot camp to learn how to learn quickly, basically. Like just apply your skills, apply what you know, get an answer and figure it out. You can imagine that kind of work is pretty exhausting. 80-hour weeks sometimes, maybe more, sleeping on a conference room floor, high travel, all the things. So that led me to kind of look at things and say, all right, I'm going to go into the startup space. I was in New York at the time. At least I'll mostly be able to sleep in my bed at night, right? It was a series of like iterative changes. But from there it was sort of coming in, especially to earlier stage startups where there was no processes. So like really building financial operations from sometimes just a company that had a checkbook. Sometimes they didn't even have a checkbook when I got hired. So that was the first decade of my career. Obviously worked a lot. It took a toll. Um, as people, and especially when we're on a journey, we don't also usually talk about the lived experience that goes alongside the resume experience. So for me, I didn't talk about it at the time, but I think it's important to note now, it was a period of loss. I had 8 family members and friends die in a fairly, like in about a 2-year time frame. And so that gave me an inflection point to say, is this how I want to be living my life for the rest of it? And the answer was a hard no. So then it was just a series of like, how do I work for a more humane company in a more humane situation? How do I use the skills that I have in a different way? And along that path, it was, how do I get myself healthier and just feeling better? I was toasted. And as I did that, other women around me were like, hey, what are you doing? Can you do this for me? Can I hire you? And so that ended up leading to a 10-year journey of coaching, I would say frazzled type A women, where it took one to know one. And I loved that work, but I didn't love how isolated I felt. And so after about a decade, I felt like I really missed being part of a team. And so it was, okay, I have all these different skills. Like, what does this net out to? And I had some friends in the UX space that pointed me in that direction. And I went through the program at General Assembly, and I had some really great teachers, and they're like, you're not a UX designer. Have you heard of this thing called service design? And so that set me on the path. And now I find myself at a financial services and insurance company, where we have 170 different products. So there's plenty of stuff to design and redesign around here.
That's quite a journey. So you're on your third episode, your third professional
Third and
chap.
final, I think.
Who knows? Wow, finance, coaching, and now into service design. Quite a ride, and we'll surely hear more about how you brought all those experiences, or how you are bringing all those experiences back to the work that you do today. But I'll take a pause here for a second and sort of flip the microphone to Sid. Do you also have like a finance or a startup background, or is it something completely else for you?
Wow. Well, well, honestly, I was so engrossed in Kara's story that now I have to rethink what I was going to say. But yeah, uh, I definitely don't come from a background which is very far from design, I would say. So in my case, I started studying architecture way back in 2010, and that was my first introduction to design in any way. So in the beginning years, you start with simple pieces of design, product design, things like that. Then I worked as an architect for about 3.5 years or so, and at that time I was going through all those questions as to why designers have such less say in what gets developed in the end. And at least I can tell about my experiences in India, that used to be the case. And then I kind of began to look into, trying to get into other fields of design. So I thought, why not look into industrial design? And then through a lot of hit and trial, I landed upon working with a startup as it was a very small startup just out of Y Combinator, and it had just started having a team, so they hired me. And there my role there, I was first introduced to something like, how do you give investor pitches, right? So that was my first introduction to how a business actually works. And that got me really interested that, oh, there are certain things about how to connect money streams to what you're making or doing. There are ways about, how to, get investors interested, talk about P&L, profit and loss statements, things like that. And yeah, I'm not so good at maths or the related things. So I had been very away from accounting, much unlike Kara, like completely opposite to that. So I started reading about, could I even do something like an MBA or things like that? And then I landed upon some Medium articles which talked about service design. I was like, okay, this is something I got to read. And I tried to convince my bosses there that, hey, like this is also a way in which design can contribute to business building. And eventually, then I did a course about that, TSSD in Polytechnico, and then that's after that I got my first break as a service designer during my internship and in Frankfurt. Then I moved to full time working as an agency, and just about last year was the first time I started my in house journey. So like from that regards, I'm very new to this field as compared to most other people in our dinner sessions.
Mm,
So yeah, that's
yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. Now,
Short
architecture
journey.
seems to be a good way in to service design. You said, I think for the listeners right now, it would be interesting to hear a bit more about the context that you're in. You're in India, but in a very specific type of company industry. Could you share a little bit more about that and your role, and maybe without breaking any confidentiality, what are some of the challenges that you're working on right now?
Where I work at, just a little bit of context. This company is Amura Health. We are into telemedicine and remote healthcare and wellness provision. Essentially, we work with people who are dealing with chronic diseases, and we try to work on natural molecular therapy amongst other methods to help them either get into a state of remission or continue a balanced lifestyle uh, post their detection of a chronic disease, right? And that involves a lot of coaching from our side as well as medical supervision. um, and it's so this is also a startup, or let's say a scale up, because we are kind of in a mid stage in our growth journey, and we're expanding very fast as of now. We are trying to occupy this space because technically there's no similar service like this which exists in India. And so, the big challenge right now is that the organization is wanting to grow, or the organism is wanting to grow, but the nervous system of the organism also has to grow simultaneously so as to keep its organs alive. And that's where my small team of colleagues comes in. And so, like when I came here, I was presented with two domains: one, service design for customer experience, and the other was employee experience. And in that, then we began to look at, you know, on one side, there's service optimization for the ongoing system. But the bigger goal right now is things like, um, we are looking into different growth patterns for individual employees. what would keep our workforce interested in continuing to be innovative rather than just being at the bare minimal or the optimal situation, right? Because like most of our office space, the average age is between 25 and 40, so it's a pretty young crowd, and they are very enthusiastic right now, and that's what pushed the company to the kind of growth that we've had in the last years. And so the big challenge is to maintain it. uh,
Yeah. People are eager and looking forward. And that is also a big part of service design, right? Not just the end user, the end customer, but also the people who are delivering the service. Kara, like when you hear the story and you've been part of the conversations in our community as well, there are so, like, you get quote unquote hired as a service design professional, but in practice that can mean a million different things. We're very curious, like, what does that look like for you? What are some of the challenges that you are tackling and addressing at the moment?
Yeah, I
mm,
think I'm almost at the 2-year mark at Allied, and so spent the first year working on one larger product, and then have recently in this past year shifted over to supporting claims, right? So if we're a company that sits at the intersection of finance and insurance with 170 products, like we're B2B business, right? So most of our clients are credit unions, banks, other financial institutions, and the types of products we have are really wide ranging, but if you think of it, it's like it could be anything from an insurance policy tailored to a credit union in case someone falls on an icy sidewalk, all the way to escrow products that protect and manage risk for our credit unions and banks when they loan money to someone to buy a house, right? And then, I mean, there's even more beyond that. Like our sales team has gotten really creative over, I think, almost 3 decades in this space. So with that, I think, some of the types of things that we tackle are common to all service designers, right? I'm sure every service designer listening that's embedded knows a client says, "Hey, I have more than one product that I'm purchasing from you. Why does it sometimes feel like we're working with different companies?" Right? Like that's such a common thing in our industry. So I think some of the projects that me and my partner at work, we're a team of 2 service designers, um, tend to tackle. But right now with claims, I'm doing something. It feels really outside the box for this organization, but I think my boss has recently been invited to speak about how our UX lab has gone from 7 to about 25 people in the last probably 5 to 7 years. I think from a UX perspective, like there's more maturity on that side. With service design, we're often coming in and it's sometimes it reminds me of startup energy sometimes, despite being a more mature company, where it's the Wild West. Like you don't know like what's really gonna like what they ask for your help with and then where you end up helping is really different. And so I find myself right now on this project where the claims team, due to market conditions, got really, really behind for a bit, just coming out of the pandemic and the way the market shifted. And you can imagine our claims team supports so many different products in the company. So everyone has been kind of taking a look at like operationally, how do we improve how claims processing is happening? And the software we're using, the choices we're making on the technology side. But last year there was a big pause where it was, okay, there's some foundational tech things that need to be stronger and need to be just more streamlined. I'm not the tech person. But what I was also seeing is like there's some culture issues. And I had used a tool in the past called the emotional culture deck, which is It's produced by riders and elephants down in New Zealand. And it's a deck of cards with positive and negative, or desired and undesired emotions, right? Like they're 2 colors and a game that you can play with. And so it's one of those things, like, to try to understand, like, there's all this anecdotal stuff about what's going on with our culture. Do we really understand it? And I just sort of raised my hands and said, while tech is being handled by another team, how do we then leverage the people part of service design, right? Because it's people, process, technology. So yeah, that's leading to probably a couple quarters of work of just, I think I have 40 workshops slated for the next couple of months to really work with the entire claims team and learn more and measure up what is happening with that culture so we can design some changes there.
I love this example. And your remark about service design being the Wild West, I think a lot of people will resonate with that. And the great thing, again, about your example is that we often look at service design as like, we need to have a journey map and we need to do qualitative research. Like there is sort of a standard notion. But if you, for instance, read the book about the design materials of service design, you come into stuff like culture, processes, like a lot of other, even copywriting content. So service design is much more diverse, and that, of course, makes it a lot harder for people to understand what we actually do. But what you're addressing here is just culture as another design material, as an element of a service. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put it. And truth be told, I was scared out of my mind. Like there was a part of me, especially, having run my own business for 10 years, being more entrepreneurial, working in startups and being a controller sometimes on the startup side, like where I had a seat at the table. So I could come up with something that felt a little left or right of center and I would be heard. I think now coming back into a much larger organization as an IC, I don't have that freedom and latitude as much as I used to. So like when I was recognizing this, it was just this nagging feeling of like, we're doing all this stuff to improve the tech, but we know the people like are not happy. And I don't think the goal is not to have people be happy, right? Like that is like, let me walk that one back right now. It's not everyone comes to work and it feels like a parade or a picnic or just something wonderful, but like, is there psychological safety? Do people feel empowered to speak up when they have a solution, when they have a better idea? Just, do people feel comfortable expressing how they feel? Because if they're spending all their energy suppressing like what's going on, that turns into gossip and eye rolls and all sorts of unproductive things. So, I kept landing on, what are we doing on the people side? Like, it seems like we're leaving a lot on the table and not like ignoring it isn't working. But no one, like when I took this to the claims leaders, like these folks have been there over a decade, maybe a decade and a half. I was getting, no one has ever done anything like this from what I've seen at Allied. And, my boss gave me a lot of room to move. And I said, I really want to pitch this. And he was like, okay, I'll support you. But I knew, like, even though I had his sort of blessing to have these conversations and poke at it, I felt like I'm either going to get fired or this will be a home run. Right. Sorry, guys. You're probably not baseball fans, but it's a good thing.
And just for the record, at the time of recording, you're still at the company, right? So
I am. I'm still at the company.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that is actually a very nice segue into sort of our second scene or second chapter of this conversation, because you mentioned psychological safety and being able to speak up. We already were addressing different design materials and services. One of the design materials that we often take for granted is us, the human, the designer, the professional. And within our circle community, we often take the first quarter of a new year to really focus on the professional. So this year, the start of 2026, our first quarter is the season of our first quarter is titled The Resilient Self. And it has already sparked a lot of strong, deep, important conversations. You both hosted a session in our community. If anyone is listening to this for the first time and has no clue what the circle is or what this community is, it's a group of in-house service designers who get together to learn from each other, to share stories, to share best practices, but also things that did not work, really about lived experiences. And we get together at least twice a month, hosted sessions by members like Kara and Sid. And maybe I'm sure that it's interesting to sort of double click on the topics that you lay on the tables at our dinner table sessions to give the listener a perspective of what it is that is important for in-house service designers to also explore and discuss. Sid, I'm going to start with you. You had a session which was quite reflective. And if I'm not mistaken, the title of your session was The Liminal Space Between the Work and the Worker. Sounds a little bit cryptic. So could you take us back to how did you come up with this topic and what was sort of the intent of your session?
So yeah, I mean, as you said, Mark, this quarter we are handling the resilient self, and within that, I chose to look at how can we dissociate the deliverable from the personal identity of the person who is delivering it, or is at least been like entitled to perform, right? And so I, the first of all, why that part got interested me was because this is something that I'm kind of living on a daily basis, and so is my team, and we are trying to solve for it. And that's when the whole topic of what is the gap between the work and the worker, or what I do and what I produce. There has to be at least a shield in the middle, which at least protects me and my abilities from the result of the output that we produce. And why I say that, because see, we have seen in design quite often, I'm sure, that uh, we are not the judge of what we produce. It's the people for whom we are producing, and what and how they judge it is outside of our control. And that's the new learning that we get when we put something out in the world. And then if we are scared by how people will judge our work, then we won't learn anything, and that would cause us to be in this cycle of self depreciation, uh, which I have seen happening with a lot of my friends back in school. And eventually, we all kind of try to come out of it, including me. So, like when the first jury happened in your life and your professor tells you, hey, you probably haven't thought this through. And then you start to, begin to rethink of all the nights you've worked on and the work that you've put in, and you've almost married your work, and now you're like, hey, maybe there's some other better way to do it. You have to kind of rethink, and unless you come out or detach yourself from the work, you won't be able to make the best use of the learnings that you're getting from. And so I thought that maybe this is something that I should get everybody else's perspective on uh, in the dinner table. So, and that's why this topic.
I think this is maybe this is for a lot of professions, but for design specifically, that a lot of self-identity and self-worth is tied up in the artifacts that we put out into the world. In service design, maybe it's even harder, because what are the artifacts that we are putting out in the world, and how do we find how do we know that we're contributing in a meaningful way if people are just like judging the output instead of looking at you as a person? Like, what did you let's dive already into the content, and I'll get back to you, Kara, in a second, but what happened in that session? Like, how did the conversation with the other service design professionals go in the circle?
So as as you were saying, like I tried to make it as reflective as possible, because I wanted to know how what others feel about this topic. So we had a simple set of questions. We heard stories from each other. People described where they felt safe, where they felt unsafe, or where there was a point where they thought that somebody else was having a careful watch over them. And sometimes it was more of a protective watch. There were some angels on the outside that were pulling them, or there were some angels on the inside that pushed them to, you know, uh, muck away this cloud of self judgment. And by the end, we tried to look at what would safe failures look like. And I think that was a point where everybody was open to just describe what is missing from their workspace, or at least they feel that it should there should be more of, to practice design in a non-judgmental way, and to be able to innovate. And a lot of wonderful things came to the table, in a very metaphorical way, I would say. So that was really nice to see.
We'll get back to your key takeaway and how you are applying that to your own practice in a second. Kara, you had a title which actually I think relates a lot to what we just discussed. I think it was resilience as, I'm going to cheat, capacity, not output. So let's maybe first explore what is resilience as output. What does that look like, and what does it look like as capacity? And of course, we're also curious, why should we think and explore this topic in the first place?
Yeah, I think it definitely dovetails with everything you and Sid were just describing. Especially, I know I'm guilty of it. I'm sure others listening are guilty of it, of wrapping some of our identity into how successful our work is, when the piece that we can actually drive and own is sometimes such a sliver of the giant, ambiguous, complex process. So I think, again, that coaching instinct woke up in me when I sort of thought about what this quarter, the resilient self, brought. And I think, looking at that through a service design lens, it's, resilience as output is about how much can I carry. And so that was something we explored out of the gate in the dinner table session, of just like, how does that show up? And have a whole board of like performing professionalism when I'm depleted, like working Monday through Saturday, like every week, just to keep things going. Right? That resilience as output is about what gets rewarded at work. And it's usually, running yourself into the ground, right? That makes you a team player in a lot of organizations. I've certainly worked at some that believe that. But if you flip it and say, what is resilience as a capacity? That's about what sustains the work and what allows me to stay in the work, and in this context, as a service designer, right? Because we're doing deeply human-centered work sometimes, even if it's not like user research in a space like Sid's working in, that can probably be a lot to hold as a designer some days when you're talking to someone with complex medical issues, or chronic medical issues, I should say. but it's, that in and of itself, the emotional labor that we have to do makes it hard. So how can we do this work and not become numb, cynical, or depleted in the process, and also not trade our self-worth and self-identity? So yeah, I mean, we looked at both of these topics like as a group, and sort of there was a lot of brainwriting and note taking, but I also wanted to give people something to take with them to manage their self-care. And so we brought just a coaching exercise, a wheel with a spoke, and had people kind of look at like and rate the different aspects in life, right? And you could change these dynamics to your heart's delight, but it's things like spirituality, creativity, career, nutrition, home environment, relationships, right? And just as a way to kind of hone in on where are things feeling really dented right now. And so using that to kind of consider how are we taking care of ourselves as service designers so that we can stay in resilience as a capacity.
Such a key topic, and like we mentioned, we often forget that we are the most important tool that we have. We always look for yet another framework, yet another method, yet another deck of cards. But like the most important tool that we have is ourselves. Like if we aren't functioning, you mentioned nutrition, like all those things that are so important get, I wouldn't even say neglected, but overlooked, right? And unless you take a conscious act of reflecting on that, like it's hard to take it for granted. Like what happened? You took a slightly different approach than we usually do in our dinner table sessions. Like what happened in your session?
Yeah, so we had a volunteer. So Sarah, I got to give her
Props to Sarah.
mad props. Yes, because she just agreed to volunteer with kind of blind and came in. And so it was me modeling a coaching space. And some things I hope the designers listening like took away from it was everything was an open-ended question or just a reflection of the thing Sarah said before. So it was really me trying to like just model like being really present and like what can open up when we're not trying to like force it, like when we're able to just be organic and truly just listening in that space, which is hard to do sometimes when there's 15 service designers staring. But they also had a job in the observer space, and so it was pushing on all of them after doing their own sort of circle of life exercise and reflecting on their own situation, then hearing someone go deeper on one of the aspects. They were tasked with like, what were they noticing or what was coming up for them? Because a big part of listening, and I find being effective as a service designer, is like, how tuned in are we to not just the words people are saying, but what is happening in the space in between? And, I work remote. We're all remote right now. Like, you don't get as much nonverbal, but I've learned as a coach after 10 years, like, even if I was doing phone sessions, you can hear a click in the throat, like when someone swallows, and that's like, oh, they're thinking, they're processing something hard. You can hear these things. And so I was challenging them to listen, like, what's coming up for you? What biases, what judgments, and then to think about that in relation, take what they're seeing being modeled, and then how does that relate to the circle exercise? So there was a lot of sense making and thinking. People were quieter than normal. I'm going to take that as they were in a different headspace.
Well, what I really liked about that session is it was almost, and maybe you would even describe it as a mindfulness exercise. So we are always turned on. We are always running forward. We are always high paced. When do you get the opportunity and permit yourself to sort of almost pause, relax, listen to your senses. What is my body telling me? And maybe it sounds quite abstract and not very applied, but I think the net effect was that you gain a lot by just, I don't know, being more mindful. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, like 1,000%. I think one of the things, actually, let me share this from my annual review last year. When my boss opened the conversation, the first thing he said to me out of the gate was comments about how present I am. Like that he always feels like I'm listening, that he always feels like I'm dialed in, and that I'm just really present with people in a way that he doesn't see very often. But I think that's one of the things that allows me to influence decisions that allow, because I mean, side note, I also volunteer as a mediator once a week, like outside of work, often doing either messy public community disputes or like custody and visitation stuff. So I tone that muscle weekly, but I think to be able to influence, you have to understand like where someone else is coming from, what's in it for them. Like, and that's hard to do when you're multitasking or trying to do 17 other things and also, solve all the complex problems and plan workshops and do the work. I sometimes struggle with feeling incredibly slow or different or like that I'm not rushing. But when I rush, the work suffers. And when I'm present, I learn more in a half an hour conversation than trying to get at it some other way.
I think you had the quote in the session, something like "Slow down, we're in a rush." Was that you?
Yeah, no, it's William. It's William. I think it's attributed to William Ury at the Harvard Negotiation Project and an author. But from mediation. It's slow down. We're in a hurry.
Yeah, yeah. It's so important, and I'm so happy that we are able to create the space for professionals like you to engage in these mindfulness practices in a safe space where it's permitted to do this. Like I can imagine it's so hard in a context where everybody around you is frantically typing on their keyboard, sending out the next email. Like where do you permit yourself to be present, to be mindful, to be really there? Apparently you, Kara, are managing, but this is something that is quite unique. Thanks for sharing, Sid. I want to sort of wrap this section up with you, because the thing that we didn't yet explore was, okay, in your session there was also a lot of reflection, finding a way to give meaning to our work and our identity without self-identifying with the work that we do. What did you take away from that session, and how are you applying that to your work?
I would say is that um, see, there are things which I came to understand from the perspective of uh, organizational learning, which I am now applying in one of the projects that we are having right now in the trust space. Actually, so this comes under the purview of organizational design for us. Um, we are trying to create what is called as critique councils, or groups of people, even from different operations teams, who are trying to who would be there to kind of cross question each other when a new decision is taken at various times in the projects. Now this is something which came up from as a collective of all the learnings people wrote on the last board in that exercise, which was that what does safe failure look like. And so for a failure to be safe, or for the safe space to be maintained, it was turning out that you not only need a space of less judgment, but you also need a space where uh, you can fail as many times as you can, and the initiative is uh, rewarded rather than the output. But at the same time, the question came in that is there a possibility for a business to reward only initiative all the time without uh, you know uh, having a look at the output? Because as we all know, like, I mean, any business survives on its output. So if you don't make a profit, you have to pull down the shutters and close shop. But at the same time, when there needs to be this safe thinking space where people are led to initiate and show their courage and show their creativity. So this is what we're trying to translate into. I mean, this is just one of the small initiations where we're still prototyping it, and probably it will take some months to, even start showing the first results in our operations.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah. Well, you said it's a small thing, but I don't think it's small at all. And there is so much cross pollination, because what you're addressing and what Kara started with in our conversation, you're talking about culture, how to create a culture, how to nurture a culture. And that is what you're sort of doing with that as well. So again, culture maybe as a design material, or the psychological safety as a design material. Our work is, the fun thing about the work is that it is so diverse. That's at the same time probably the most challenging thing. For anyone who's listening and feels like, gosh, those sound like important conversations that I want to be part of as well, check the links in the show notes, because there you'll find how you can learn more about the circle and maybe be on the podcast next time as well. We always welcome courageous minds who want to be mindful with us as well. So we tend to wrap up these Inside Service Design episodes with trying to see what success looks like. Because, again, we start with what are you working on? And we see all types of challenges. And we look at, like, what are the design materials in this case? But it's often so hard to pinpoint how do we know that we are making progress. And Sid, also to your point, like, if we are not self-identifying with the output, like, it's messy, it's hard. Like, how do we find accomplishment and a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day, at the end of the week? So maybe Kara, could you shed a light on that from your perspective? Like, what does success look like to you? How do you see if you're making progress? Tell us a little bit more if you can.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I wrestle with this question a lot. I think being newer to this field, coming back from running a small business to being an IC, has certainly challenged the notion of what that looks like for me on a daily basis. Yeah, this question is incredibly hard, and I'm not trying to dodge it completely, and I'm sure others listening can relate. But I think about an interesting conversation that I had with my fellow service designer at work just recently. I think sometimes what we offer is more about I I've always used the term lubricating a situation. I feel like I do my best work when I'm sort of moving around and making sure that gears are not grinding. So, but with that said, it's hard to measure the value of that. Like, you almost have to just stand back and say, okay, if I was removed from this situation, who wouldn't have been connected to each other? Who wouldn't know about these other projects? Like, there's so much of, like, just cross pollinating and lubricating a situation and just recognizing, like, friction over here, friction over there, naming it, pointing at it, getting other people to see it and care about it. It's not sexy work
It's
some
selfless.
days, and
It's a lot of selfless work. Yeah.
and invisible.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard to quantify. Like, I think I think it came up in another dinner table, like the idea of like how many connections were made. I think it goes back to something Gina had brought to one of our dinner tables, like how are things getting connected? But I would say other things that motivate me personally are looking at a situation, looking at my skill set and saying, which rummaging around the bag, pulling out something and saying like, okay, I think I can contribute this and this will have value in this situation. Um, can I contribute something of value? I think it's also about, can I do this work sustainably at this point in my career? And I think it's also about, can I be learning along the way? I think a lot of service designers are similar to me and move like sharks, where if we're not learning, we're dying, right? Like sharks have to keep swimming. I think service designers have to keep learning. We're
But those are,
probably people struggling with that.
yeah, those are quite uh, quite strong and good indicators of success. And we often hear about what you mentioned, how many connections did I make, or I don't know, how many workshops did I run, but sort of looking into the mirror and am I doing this work in a sustainable way? Like that is a pretty good success criteria. The other thing is maybe, am I proud of what I'm doing? Like it's very subjective. So there are success factors that you can look at from yourself as a person, rather than what's happening in the organization, and take yourself as a measure of success.
Yeah, am I working within my own values, right? If
Super
you've spent
important.
any time
Yeah.
even thinking about values,
Yeah.
like at the end of the day, I mean, not all of us save babies on a regular basis, right? Like at a financial services company, I'm not doing that work on a daily basis, but I think I have to get up and live with myself and look at myself in the mirror. So where do my values align with the corporate values, and where can I bring skills that match that?
Yeah. And that's actually, I wanted to say, it's in some shape or form that is harder to quantify, but it's also easier because it's you and you sort of know instinctively whether or not that is the case. Yeah, I love it. Very important to put those measures of success also on sort of the menu. How is it for you, Sid? Do you align with what Kara just said, or do you have other ways to know that you're making progress or positive impact?
I mean, I would say I certainly align with the dilemma that Kara presented about like measuring success and the the way in which she presents the fact that am I doing the right thing every day. Um, in my case, or at least like how we're trying to keep ourselves motivated in this kind of a fast running environment as a team is now this had been a recent realization. I must also add that um you know when just to give a context to that, we talk a lot about, or we are discussing constantly with different teams about a lot of process correction as a part of service optimization. And then there are moments when the person sitting in front of you says, hmm, isn't that how it should have been? It's like they come to a realization that, yeah, naturally, like if you put away all the digital tools and physical tools and everything else aside, at a human to human level, isn't that how it should have been? And the moment somebody says that, it's like, okay, yeah, that's a little bit. Somebody has realized something, and maybe that will lead to a buy-in. Maybe that will lead to, you know,
Yeah.
a little bit of a change in their way of working. So we tend to record that
Yeah, it's
as
helping.
a proof.
It's a sense making It's bringing humanity back into the work that we're doing. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, you wanted to add something, Sid?
No, I guess, yeah. I mean, that's what at least I've been doing right now. There are
Yeah,
no other measures for me.
it sounds like
For
a
one.
good measure of success. So we want to wrap up these conversations with more curiosity and with more questions than answers, because as you said, Carol, we are sharks. We want to learn. Answers are boring. Questions are far more interesting. And the question that I have to you, and I'll start with you, Kara, is what would you like to know from the people who are listening to this conversation right now, the service design professionals out there? If you had a room full of them in front of you, what would you ask them? And Sid, I'll also have this one for you.
I feel like, again, this idea of invisible value that we bring, right? Like sometimes you can only see it in the absence of it. I would love to hear more about how other service designers like are getting to Friday and feeling like they win, right? Or have a win to put up. Because some weeks it does feel like, I'm cat wrangling here, or something's blocked or whatnot. I think just knowing that we're not in it alone and that others face this challenge only would help us strengthen how we position the value of the work that we do.
Almost sounds like parenting. if people are listening to this and have young kids, this very much is relatable. How do we get to Friday and we're not alone in this? Yeah, no, that's a good question. What about you, Sid?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's a very good analogy you gave. Like, it's almost like parenting. And we are parenting an organization without being a parent, but more as an assistant in the system, or a steward, or a facilitator, as like we us designers, we all tend to be. I would certainly like to ask the more experienced brethren, as like just like Kara and everybody else in dinner table, is usually in a journey like this, as you grow older and further, how do you maintain your ethics, your core? Because oftentimes either the design team's culture changes the company's culture, or at least contributes to changing it, or the company's culture would consume the design team's culture. And so, how do you prevent the latter from happening, or at least like delay that from happening, so that the design team still has value left in it? Is something that I would definitely like to know.
Yeah, yeah. What's I don't know the saying, but we are shaped by the world, and the world, like we are shaping the world at the same time. Something like that. Great question. Like, how do you keep that design attitude, design spirit, design mindset, and not get swallowed in by the dominating culture, whatever that might be in an organization, whether that's business, product, engineering? Great question. Something to think about, and that's exactly what we want to do with these conversations. So, Kara, Sid, thanks so much for coming on. It's an honor to have you as Circle members. It's an honor to have you here on this podcast to share your experience, to share your lessons learned, and to ask important questions to the community. So once again, thanks for making time and being here with us.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Kara, for being here.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sid.
I really appreciated the shift in pace with this conversation. We often talk about scaling and speed, but Kara reminded us of a powerful quote from her days as a mediator: "Slow down, we are in a hurry." Sometimes the fastest way to fix a broken process is to stop, listen, and actually tune into the nervous system of the organization. As Sid put it, I'm taking away Sid's concept of the shield, the idea that we need a deliberate boundary that separates our personal identity from our professional output. It's not about caring less, it's about caring sustainably. And I love Kara's definition of success. Did I lubricate the situation? Did I connect the right people? Did I prevent the gears from grinding? Yes, it is invisible work, but it's the work that keeps the machine running. In the episode, Sid asked a question that I think every in-house service design professional eventually faces, and I want to pass it on to you. How do you keep your design culture from being consumed by the company culture? When you are a small team in a big machine, how do you hold on to your ethics and your way of working without getting swallowed whole? And finally, if you are looking for a place where you can be your resilient self without having to put on a corporate mask, come join us in the Circle community. It's the place where we support the worker, not just the work. Check us out at servicedesignshow.com/circle, and of course, you'll find that link in the show notes as well. My name is Mark Fontijn. Thanks again for listening. Take care of yourself, and I'll catch you very soon in the next episode of the Service Design Show.